I'm just currently playing Godzilla Monsters on my top floor, and despite how annoying it can be to get hit over and over again, it's fun to blow shit up. Now while I play this, you guys can enjoy Chapter 7. And here we are, at the final world. I don't want to discuss this part, and it still bothers me very much, but it's something I have to do, so that I can put this behind me. People deserve to know. At this point, I was well aware of the game's unnatural nature, but Zenith was different than the other worlds. While the others were certainly strange, and some things frightening, the world of Zenith was like a nightmare, and I didn't have to go any further than the board screen for an indication that something was wrong with Zenith. The first thing I noticed was the blood-red texture on the board, and the music, which was an eerie whistling tune. I noticed that I had Solomon and Angerus back, and I felt better for a second. Then I strolled over to the right to see who my enemies would be this time. This time, it was Destroyer and Ghidorah, but judging from the icon, it was a different Ghidorah than the original, standing on the ground instead of flying. The grotesquely detailed pinkish-red icon also caught my eye. I couldn't tell what it was supposed to be, and I was afraid to find out. Going back to my side of the board, I decided there wasn't much choice but to do my usual routine, and go into the quiz level before doing anything else. I was not ready for what happened. I jumped back and disappeared, accompanied by a terribly distorted version of the password theme. It looked as if Glitch had fallen victim to some terrible glitch. Is this what he meant by, "Will you miss me"? Did he know this would happen? My thoughts were stopped short as I noticed the screen was glitching, seemingly falling apart when I was inactive, so I quickly washed out. When I got back to the board, I had somehow gained a new monster. I hadn't even been asked if I want one. I tried to select it, and this happened. What the hell is going on? The game's behavior was scaring me, and I hadn't even started the levels yet. I couldn't understand why I was randomly given a new character and then denied use of it. But for the time being, there was little that could be done, and I viewed the last TV screen. No animation, no music, dead. Every instinct I had was telling me to stop playing, to just turn the game off, and something in the game itself might have been trying to warn me as to just how horrible this last world was. But then, every stretch of the way I was compelled to give up. I couldn't do that now, on the last world. Besides, after tying me with memories of Melissa, I felt the game owed me some answers. I noticed that the first level was a red temple, so at least I would be familiar with the level graphics if nothing else. And I went in with Godzilla, the monster I was most familiar with. Godzilla had been shrunk, the level and score meters had vanished, and the blue temple statues were back. The music was similar to the blue temple also, strange, haunting vocalizations. I tried to get my spirits up by thinking, well, if this level is like the Blue Temple, then that might mean there might be no enemies to deal with. How wrong I was. After a short walk, all the statues' eyes started glowing, and a pack of the beasts from Shadow Labyrinth came charging into me. Since they were coming from the right of the screen, I had to fight my way through them. This battle greatly tested my reflexes, but thanks to my speed, I plowed through the beasts. They gave off health power-ups after dying, which helped me recover the damage they had given me. However, as I continued through the hallway, the statue's eyes glowed again, summoning another wave. It seemed to be the same number of them, but I was less prepared this time and took more damage. I had gone through 4 of these waves until I reached the end of the hall, where I keep beamed the last of the monsters over the edge into an abyss. At first, it seemed I had reached a dead end, but after the statue's eyes stopped glowing, a brick path slowly appeared before me. I followed the path, which kept me moving towards the right until it stopped at a wall, where I was going vertically by jumping up ledges. Along the way, I encountered new creatures, and some sort of strange shrine, which had a statue of the Hell Beast and some other creature I don't recognize. As I went through, the path took a downwards direction. I had to carefully aim my jumps to avoid the enemies, which was plentiful in this part of the stage. They didn't have many attacks, but they could easily shove you over the edge of a platform. At the end of this level, there are a few small platforms floating above nothingness. I landed on one towards the left of the screen, and then something came down from above. It looked like the blue angel from the graveyard, except now it was red and had a skull face. Any of the pleasant feelings I had from the Blue Angel were not present with this red one, as it just hovered around. Its eye sockets started glowing just like statues, summoning monsters to attack me. Surely this was not the same malevolent being I encountered before. This must be some kind of imposter. The battle was nerve-wracking, as I started off with nearly half my health and had to deal with multiple opponents, as well as the threat of gravity. To make things even worse, as the Red Angel took damage, some of the panels fell, until only 3 remained. But my luck had not run out yet. Just when I thought it was over, I struck the Red Angel one more time, and it turned out that one last hit was all it could take. Just as the Red Angel completely disintegrated, the game instantly went back to the CF board. I moved Mothra over to the nearest stage from the Red Temple, which seemed to be a garbled mess of letters spelling kill, and began playing. As suspected, all the level's graphics were made of jumbled letters, and Mothra, just like Godzilla, was shrunk to half size. I began to suspect that all the ZF levels would be like this. The background music was terrible, like if someone put all the sounds an NES was capable of making into a blender and then piercing them back together into a song. I had to turn the volume down because of it. Playing as Mothra made avoiding the enemies easier, but they were nevertheless determined to get at me. The first enemies I saw were headless Gigants, and later on there were hybrid monsters pieced together from previous bosses, like the bottle and 8-headed thing seen above. 5 minutes had gone by as I didn't see anything new, and the levels shifted into another segment. The music changed from the loud annoying beeps into something far more ambient and menacing. The level graphics also changed, now looking like a blood-drenched junkyard. The way everything in this level was red made it sickening to look at. The enemies multiplied in number, never ceasing to fall after me, and became harder and harder to avoid. And at the end of the level, the situation reached the climax, as the swarms of the monsters fused together into one enormous terrifying hybrid. Once I had gone through the initial shock, I discovered the way to destroy this thing, consistently shooting I-beams at the Hedorah cluster that form its heads. If you attacked anything else, it would regenerate the damage. Even with that knowledge, this was an extremely difficult fight. I'd say it was as hard as fighting the Moon Beast was, if not harder. Its most common attack was lunging forward with its arms, covered with Gigant saws and blades. If they touched it, it would instantly drain health. When it was over, the remaining monsters collapsed into a heap. Then they, and the ground below them, started to disintegrate and sink towards the bottom of the screen. When I came back to the board, I thought to myself, so far, the game has been putting the easiest levels first. If that's the case, how bad would the rest of Zenith be? With 2 levels down and 3 to go, my monsters and I had taken a foothold in the world of nightmares that was Zenith. Deciding what action to take next was more intense and difficult than ever before. But ultimately, I had no way of knowing what the next levels would be like, or how well my monsters would be prepared for them. So my only option was to guess. I tried to interpret what the icons of the next levels ahead of me were. The last level before the boss battles was obviously representing some type of volcanic area, with lava and open flames. The middle icon I still didn't get, except that it looked fleshy, and vaguely like an organ of some kind, oddly oversized as well. The one I was nearest to, and about to enter next, looks like thorny vines covering a puddle of blood. I guess this would be a level of blood rivers, like the chase level of Dementia. As such, I went with Angerus, because due to his roaring move, he would have the fastest speed while submerged. The level which I call Blood Lake looks like I expected. Rivers of blood accompanied by thorn-covered vines, which were scattered along the sides of the ground. The music was rather faint, but I could hear a distinct drum beat and a few other instruments, a lot of echoes, and sometimes it sounded like someone was hitting a drum on the water. I was disappointed to see that Angerus was shrunk just as Godzilla and Mothra had been. Apparently all the ZF levels would be like this. I felt less secure when my giant monster is no longer so giant. I walked along without interruption for only a minute, until my patch reached the end. There was a massive gap between the ground I was walking on and the ground to the right of the stream. I was swam across it and continued walking to the right, but due to the huge mass of brambles in the way, there was nowhere to go. 2 creatures were gliding membranes on their arms, and lamprey-like mouths were perched on outstretched vines and screeching at me, much like a crow does to an invader of its territory. Another unnerving display of possible sentience by the creatures of this game. If it's even accurate to refer to them as being of the game, that is. I descended into the blood, slowly sinking to the floor. Aquatic enemies were everywhere, and they were hard to avoid. The black shark in particular was very aggressive and hard to deal with, but thankfully, I only encountered one. As the scene became more and more crowded, I swam up to the surface to find that it was littered with floating corpses. Creepy, but at least they're not a threat. Or so I thought. Until they all sprang up to life and leaped on me. They were trying to pull me under, and they were draining my health as they did it. They all attacked as a group, and when I got one off me, another would jump on me from behind. I had to curl up into a ball and roll for them to loosen the grip, and when they did, I quickly retreated. It wasn't long before I had reached another land path. A note regarding the brambles: you can stand on them, but it causes pain, and you can also destroy some of the vines, but only the thinner ones. I had to destroy multiple vines, as well as dealing with more enemies. I was interrupted by a screen. The screen was only up for about 30 seconds. Then it went back to the level. I was facing another dead end, and a pregnant humanoid creature being hanged from the top right of the screen by a spine or umbilical cord. Instantly, the creature's belly was split open from the inside. As the lower part of the body was ripped apart and fell into the liver below, the blood lake's boss was revealed. It came flying towards me, making a shrill hacking scream. I was forced to move back. The bat was a highly mobile boss, fast and difficult to hit. As I moved back along the ground, the monster opened its mouth and shot out a barrage of needles. I jumped over them and managed to give it a blow to the head, and it started flying out of my reach. As the bat was flying, it shot a stream of fire from its eye sockets and started trying to hit me with the flames. I rolled along the ground, which drained my power, but put us at equal speed. This cycle repeated around 3 times until the monster was defeated. With most of my health drained, I went back to the edge of the level, and the large bramble vine blocking the exit was now gone. Now, only 2 levels left to go. Who to send this time? Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus had all completed 1 level, leaving Solomon. Also, the mysterious 5th monster. I tried again to access it, but with no luck. I chose to use Godzilla again for the next level, and Solomon for the final one. The second to last level was what I referred to as the organic level, which was the most visually unpleasant of them all. Right from the start, I could see that the graphics were freakishly different. The atmosphere was gruesome and foreboding, with the addition of the loud drawing music. I was dreading what I would see in these levels, and it was only a few seconds before something appeared. 2 hideous things. It's hard to describe most of this level. Everything had this disturbing, semi-real look to it. Most of the enemies look halfway between real animals and misshapen lumps of gore with teeth. It's also worth knowing that all of them were considerably larger than Godzilla, and although the majority were not very intelligent, each of them took around 30 hits to kill. Due to this, it was a better idea to run away from them than fight, but it was never clear exactly what direction to run to. While most levels involved getting to the right to get to the exit, the path on this level was primarily getting down by walking to the edge of one platform and jumping down to a lower one. There was no way to make sure you were going the right way, nor any apparent means of getting back up to the higher platforms if necessary. Also, certain enemies acted as if they were aware you had to jump down, and would stand at the edge of a lower platform, waiting for you. When this happened, I would have to walk back and wait until the monster would leave. As I went on, I came across platforms stacked above each other with a little space in between, looking like a maze. This meant that I couldn't jump, and it made escape from enemies difficult. Thankfully, the only enemies able to fit through these mazes were the 4-legged beasts seen at the beginning of the level. Adding to the difficulty were long tapeworm-esque monsters that would rise themselves up between the platforms and trap you. The only attack that responded to this was the heat beam, which would cause them to shrink back down. But this was costing even more power, and I couldn't afford to do it without the heat beam for long. While trying to avoid the abominations that dwell in this level, I found that if you stand idle in one place for too long, the ground tries to absorb your monster. I think it was about 4 minutes before the end that this level was making me physically sick. The tension was getting to me, and having to take all of these disgusting sights made me want to puke. I nearly did pause the game and look for a bag, but I was able to hold it together. I also found a trick at the end of the level, though it was too late to do me any real good. If 2 different species of monster were to run into each other face to face, they would fight each other and leave me alone. I didn't intentionally cause this. It just happened. Finally, at the end, it was time for another boss fight. It was certainly ugly, but not quite as horrific as I feared it would be. But more important than dealing with its appearance was defeating it. And since I had less than half my health bar to start with, there was no room for errors. It was attached to the floor when I first saw it, but after 10 hits, it detached from the floor and began flowing. It moved first, and unlike the Blood Lakes boss, he wasn't impeded by any sort of gravity. It was even able to fly through the ground without any collision effect. It used this to its advantage, and would float beneath the ground to bring up randomly to bite at you. But it stopped doing this after a few well-aimed kicks to the face. The pink area on its upper jaw was a weak point. Too many hits there would cause it to spasm uncontrollably. The new strategy was to rapidly float up and down while moving back and forth across the stage, trying to consistently keep its jaws aimed towards me. Health was getting critical at this point, and I spammed the heat beam, from which it had no defense. In the last stretch of the battle, the monster had lost its mind, rapidly rushing back and forth, gashing its jaws. I had to duck under it and then strike when its back was turned. 20 more hits and it was destroyed. One last level to go. And then it was down to one last level. I didn't hesitate. I selected Solomon and entered. Perhaps a little too fast. This last level was definitely the peak of disconnect between what the NES was graphically capable of, or what this game could create. The music also caught my attention. It was one of the only songs that appeared more than once. The horrible screeching from when the Hellbeast appeared in the graveyard. As soon as I started, there was already an enemy preparing to attack. A centaur wielding a whip, and it wasn't alone. When I started fighting, several more centaurs appeared. Coming from both sides of the screen at the same time, it was too much to handle. Solomon's flight saved me from taking too much damage at the start of the level. The centaurs followed after, but seemed to be unable to jump. After escaping the centaurs, I noticed gaps in the ground. While trying to avoid the jumping sword-mouth enemies in mid-flight, I got close to the surface of the lava, and the creature emerged and tried to grab me. It didn't succeed, but I was stalled. Careful maneuvering would be needed to avoid instant death here. As new enemies appeared, the level soon became very difficult. A lot of the trouble came from stocky red demons that stood on tall, narrow mountains and spewed fire. I got by them by waiting until the back was turned, and hitting them with a flying attack, which made them fall into the lava. It was at this time I noticed that I wasn't getting any help from killing enemies. Not all the ground was stable. At one point, the ground was reduced to small chunks that slowly drifted towards the right. Some of them would sink into the lava upon landing on them, and there was no way to tell which ones would sink and which ones would not. Being so close to the lava added the threat of the lava creatures, and this was very frustrating. I was also feeling very hot, which made concentrating hard. If you ever had a heat rash, it felt similar to that. I had periodically stopped for water because of it. This was almost certainly due to the game, and not my imagination, but I kept pushing the thought out of my head. I didn't want to think about it. At the end of the stage, I encountered the boss rising from the lava, its arrival noted with an ungodly howling roar. When it walked onto the land, I saw how gigantic it was, several times the size of Solomon. I was about to fly up and attack it when it opened its mouth and let out a huge burst of fire. I had to fly to dodge the flames, and then get close enough to the boss to fire a heat beam at its face, causing it to stumble backwards. If it didn't stumble backwards, it would have kept moving left until it forced Solomon into the lava, and as there was no more ground within reach, the beast had to weigh between uses of its fire breath, as it seemed to cost a great deal of energy. I used this time to attack it, but fire wasn't its only weapon, and I had to be wary of the monster swatting at me with its clawed hands. As the health decreased, it moved faster, and the battle felt like a tug of war between the two monsters over this bridge of land. After about 40 hits, it was defeated, tumbling backwards into the lava from whence it came. And then, the final stage had been completed. At last, it was down to 2 bosses, and a final encounter with the Hellbeast. For some reason, I thought Ghidorah would be easier to beat, so I confronted him first. The classic Ghidorah music from the original started up as I was faced against the new King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was as powerful and unrelenting as ever. He instantly lashed out with gravity beams, which were more damaging than Godzilla's heat beam. It became a struggle of beating Ghidorah at every opportunity to keep him from using his attack. It became a struggle of consistently beating Ghidorah at every opportunity to keep him from using the attack. but Ghidorah soon saw through my tactic and started using physical attacks as well. He would strike with each of his necks, knocking me backward and making it impossible to get close enough to punch him. But I had an idea, to wait for him to lunge with one of its heads, and immediately blast it with the heat beam. It worked, and to my surprise, the heat beam actually obliterated Ghidorah's middle head. It was only a few seconds before I realized what this would lead to, and sure enough, King Ghidorah was using the power of the glitch to transform into Mecha King Ghidorah. But what really shocked me was the sudden change in music. I had heard before, but it wasn't from the original NES game. It was from the game Super Godzilla during the Mecha King Ghidorah fight. Mecha King Ghidorah's first attack was its most deadly, the Machine Hand. Very similar to Gigantic Saw, it immobilizes the monster and rapidly drains the health bar. Fortunately, before Ghidorah could do a lot of damage, the timer ran out. I would need to defeat Mecha King Ghidorah quickly to prevent him from using the Machine Hand, so I sent Solomon to fight him. The two monsters were evenly matched in strength, but Solomon was faster, and by slashing and heat beaming without pause, the cyborg monster soon met its end. With Ghidorah defeated, I was returned to the board. I now outnumbered the enemy by 4 monsters to 1, and victory seemed to be soon at hand. The base icon had changed to a blood red color. I could feel hatred emanating from it. I started the fight against Destroyer with Anguirus, and the music was the same as Ghidorah's. When the fight began, Destroyer was in microscopic form. After one hit, it changed into the Juvenile, which had few attacks and was also dealt with easily. The fight became serious once Destroyer entered the aggregate form, gaining the use of large arms in the micro-oxygen beam. Anguirus' world attack, which had been very useful up until now, was rendered useless by Destroyer consistently attacking me with his large arms when I tried to use it. For this part of the fight, I had to rely on brute strength. Just before the time ran out, Destroyer had changed into his flying form, which Anguirus was ill-suited to fight against. Going back in, I fought against the flying form with Mothra. Mothra was weaker than Anguirus, but was better equipped to dodge and counter flying Destroyer's attacks, so the fight was in my favor. However, the Mecha Ghidorah fight music started playing, and Destroyer changed into his final form sooner than expected, which drastically turned the tables. Mothra's attacks were doing very little to Destroyer, and I had to move furiously to avoid damage while waiting for the timer to run out. Even though it would be near impossible to beat Destroyer with Mothra, I still had 3 other monsters. Final Form Destroyer was very resistant to taking damage, and the heavily armored foe would not be defeated without a long fight. In the last part of the fight, I wasn't using much strategy, I was just attacking as brutally and as fast as I could. On its last life bar of health, Destroyer tried one last counterattack, a beam of energy from its chest. I don't know how powerful it would have been, because just before it could fire, I punched Destroyer in the chest cavity, destroying him. And then that was it. The last Kaiju boss was gone. In the midst of all the excitement, I had briefly forgotten that there was still one last thing to do before the game would be over. Seeing the icon again hit me like a ton of bricks, and I froze for a few minutes. I had come so far to get to this point, but I was terrified. I really did not want to know what the last encounter was going to be like. Before I could let myself think about it any longer, I moved Godzilla over and began the stage. You're here now. This is the end. Just one last thing to do. Just one last thing, and then it's all over. And when the last screen had changed, there was nothing. Just Godzilla and a black screen. I walked back and forth, fired a heat beam, nothing happened. Until I heard something. The faint sound of a familiar drum beat. Well, if there was ever a Hellgod stage in the video game, this one really takes the cake. It adds these weird detailed monsters that wouldn't look out of place for a Super Nintendo game. The graphics all melting, corrupt, and, well, red. This picture reminds me of that apocalypse scene from Terminator 2. And this looks like Big Bird's Crack Baby. The graphics here should be capable of working on an NES. This looks like Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis or something, but I'm pretty sure that this would break your NES from trying to render it like this. Red's just toying with me now, I know it. Trust me, Red, you won't get rid of it. When the... Oh, fuck me.